We are nearing the end of this semester. Once again, we are going to be talking about one of the branches of government. This is actually an extension of the executive branch. We'll be talking about the bureaucracies today. The bureaucracies are held within the executive branch of the government. So in this chapter, we'll look at how bureaucracies developed, how they're meant to work, and why programs and processes sometimes fail. We'll also talk about how federal agencies do their job, the different kinds of agencies that comprise the public service, and we'll talk about who controls the bureaucracy and what possible reforms. And then at the very end, I will discuss the details of your second and last assignment, which is on bureaucracy. So please pay attention while we're going through this lecture. You'll get most of your ideas from this lecture. You'll be needing to pick a bureaucracy that you want to write about. So we'll be talking about many of them. So go ahead and, let your mind figure out which one most interests you. You can find more in your book, and you can go online to find all the rest. All right, so just to start off, I just want to make sure we know where we are. So we have the three branches of government: the legislative branch, which consists of Congress, two houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives, and their staff. We have the judicial branch, which we haven't covered yet, but that includes all of the courts. But the executive branch, we only talked about really the president, the president and the vice president in the last lecture. But the executive branch actually includes the president, the president's cabinet, which is 15 different departments, all of their sub-departments, any executive agencies, independent agencies like NASA or CIA, independent regulatory commissions like the FCC, the SEC, FEC, Federal Elections Commission, and then any government corporations like the post office, and sometimes we have private contractors. So just to get an idea, bureaucracy is a large group of people, many of them experts in the field that they're working, who are involved in running a government, but who are not elected. So we'll be talking about two different types of employees in the bureaucracy. The majority of them are not elected. They are hired through a very strict process. However, each bureaucracy's heads of their departments, their secretaries and their deputy secretaries, most of them are appointed by the president. So you could have people that have been working for the government, say in nuclear energy, for many, many years, and then, as happened a couple of years ago, the head of the energy department was changed to Rick Perry, who doesn't really know anything about energy. So as we're talking about the bureaucracy, we have to think about which employees we're talking about. People who are career experts that have been with the company, with that organization, that bureaucracy for many years and have been working within the government, or the newly appointed heads who come in and either change things as directed by the president or don't. That's a possibility too. So before we start, just kind of get an idea so we're all on the same page. I'd like to watch our crash course, and hopefully we'll be able to move forward from that.
Hi, I'm Craig, and this is Crash Course Government and Politics, and today we're going to talk about bureaucracies just as soon as I finish filling out these forms. Do I really have to initial here, and here on all three copies, Stan? Regulations say so? All right. I'm just kidding. I don't really have to fill out forms in triplicate in order to make an episode of Crash Course. But this kind of stuff is one of the main reasons that people don't like bureaucracies. Americans tend to associate them with incomprehensible rules and time-wasting procedures, and probably most annoying, actual bureaucrats. But bureaucracies are a lot like our extended families in that we largely don't understand, or at least don't appreciate, the important role that bureaucracies play in our lives, mainly because of all the forms, and because my cousin who always ate all the cookies from the jar at Grandma's house. So what exactly is a bureaucracy? I don't like to do this because I'm arrogant and lazy, but sometimes it's helpful to go to a dictionary when you need to find out what a word means. So here's a serviceable political sciencey definition. A bureaucracy is a complex structure of offices, tasks, rules, and principles of organization that are employed by all large-scale institutions to coordinate the work of their personnel. 2 points to emphasize here. First, bureaucracies are made up of experts who usually know more about the topic at hand than you do, and who are able to divide up complex tasks so that they can get done. Second, all large-scale institutions use bureaucracies, so the distinction between big business and big government is, in at least this respect, bogus, or what I like to call a false dichotomy. Is that too pretentious to say false dichotomy, Stan? I don't care. I'm saying it. False dichotomy. So if people hate bureaucracies so much and compare them unfavorably with Google and Amazon, why do we have them? Well, the main reason is that bureaucracies are efficient. They make it easier for government to accomplish tasks quickly and to basically operate at all. In the US, federal bureaucrats fulfill a number of specific important functions. One, bureaucrats implement the laws that Congress writes. Have you ever read a law? They're pretty complicated. It's a good idea to have experts who can interpret them and put them into action. 2, bureaucrats also make and enforce their own rules. But this isn't as action-hero-ish as it sounds. And 3, they settle disputes through a process called administrative adjudication, which makes them kind of like courts. Now, since I know that all of you have been paying extremely close attention to these episodes, you know that at least 2 of those functions are problematic in ways that go beyond making rules that seem Byzantine or stupid, or both. Byzantupid. The big concern here is the separation of powers, which you remember is the idea that power is divided between 3 branches of government. Technically, the federal bureaucracy is part of the executive branch, but it's so big that it dwarfs the other 2 branches and can easily overpower them. Much like I overpower this eagle. That's right, eagle! I make my own rules! Like a bureaucracy. But an even more troubling, to some people, aspect of bureaucracies is what they actually do. So let's go to the thought bubble. Bureaucracies don't just enforce the rules, they make new ones, called regulations. In doing this, they are acting like a legislature, especially since the rules have the force of law and people can be punished for breaking them. For example, if you say sticks on TV, the FCC can fine you, just like the local law enforcement would if you broke a state law against speeding. And don't say sticks to the cop. But according to the Constitution, Congress is supposed to make the laws, so if you're a constitutional formalist, this is going to give you fits. On the other hand, the rulemaking process allows for a degree of popular participation that goes way beyond what happens in Congress. In 2014, Congress called for the mandatory notice and comment period on new FCC rules on the issue of net neutrality. Any person can read the proposed rules, which are not easy to understand, and offer a public comment, including suggestions for new rules using the internet. The bureaucracy is required to read the comments, and they can be incorporated into the final rules that are published in the Federal Register. So in a way, federal rulemaking is more democratic than congressional lawmaking, but it's still not in the Constitution. Administrative adjudication raises similar separation of powers issues, but they're less problematic because the Constitution gives Congress the right to establish courts other than the Supreme Court, and it doesn't say that these can't be administrative tribunals that are part of bureaucratic agencies. Many low-level bureaucratic positions are filled through competitive exam-based civil service procedures, which are supposed to ensure a level of expertise and take politics out of the staffing process. But many upper-level bureaucratic leaders, especially cabinet secretaries, and also ambassadors, are very political. For one thing, they're appointed by politicians who may be repaying favors or trying to pack the agencies with like-minded favorites. For another, bureaucrats engage in bargaining and protect their own interests, the very thing that politicians do all the time. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So, the first reason we keep bureaucracies is because bureaucracies are useful. They do get things done, even though it might not be as quickly as we'd like. And some of these things are things we want done, like inspecting our meat so we don't get E. coli or salmonella or mad cow disease. One response to this that we'll talk about later is to get rid of public bureaucracies and contract their tasks out to private companies. There's something to be said for this. After all, in a lot of ways, UPS does a better job of getting packages to us than the Postal Service does. And I also have a lot more fun at the private bowling alley than the public one. There's no such thing as a public bowling alley. If there is, I'm going. Might be free. But the main argument for privatization seems to be cost, and that one might not always be true. It seems unlikely that a private corporation would spring up to inspect meat, and although we could rely on pricing to signal that our chicken wings are salmonella-free, I don't think it's a good idea. So in addition to being useful in filling roles that the private sector might not fill, one of the reasons we have so many bureaucracies is because Congress keeps making them and delegating power to them. If we didn't have bureaucracy, congressmen and their staff would be taking on all the oversight and enforcement of their own laws. In addition to creating its own separation of powers problem, this might be kind of chaotic considering that potentially the entire House of Representatives could be replaced every 2 years. One advantage of bureaucracies is a certain amount of stability and the built-up expertise that comes with it. Probably the main reason why we don't change bureaucracies, though, is that that doing so is really difficult. Once Congress makes a bureaucracy, it's usually permanent for a number of practical and political reasons. We'll get into those reasons next time. So I'm going to wrap this up with a little bit of a reminder about federalism, based on a largely unwarranted assertion. I bet that if you ask most Americans to give an example of a bureaucracy, they will say the DMV. Most people will tell you a DMV horror story of the time they had to wait in line for 4 hours just to renew their license, and when they got to the counter, a clerk told them that they didn't have the right forms and they needed to post a money order and not a credit card or a check or even cash, and that anyway they had to go on break and I had to come back in 15 minutes and all I wanted was my license. The DMV! And I sympathize with this predicament, but I feel the need to remind anyone who has had this experience at the DMV that it's a state bureaucracy, not the federal bureaucracy. Most of the bureaucrats you meet in your daily life, teachers, policemen, tax assessors, are officials of your state government, not the federal government like bureaucrat Jimmy, which is pretty much what the framers intended. So it's a good idea to be thoughtful about which government we're going to transfer our anger towards and to rage against the correct machine. That's what federalism's all about. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.
Okay, so several things. Hopefully I'll remember to bring up each one. But the one thing that he did say at the end there was letting you know that the difference between state bureaucracies, which we have, and I believe I showed you the link to the list of state bureaucracies in the last of the Nevada state bureaucracies in the executive presidency lecture, and the difference between them and our federal bureaucracies. Your assignment is on federal bureaucracies, so please don't pick the DMV or any state bureaucracies. Okay, moving on. So, who works for the bureaucracy? We have about 2.6 million civilian workers, 4 million military workers, 19 million at the state and local level, which is about over 25 million people, are working government jobs at various different levels. So that's a lot of workers. That's a big workforce. It's probably one of the biggest employers in the United States. Now, when we look at how bureaucracies represent us, in past lectures, we looked at how well does the Congress look like us? Are there the same percentage of women that we have in the United States in Congress, or the same percentage of various races and age groups? But if we go by race, the bureaucracies actually look a lot more like us, look a lot more like the makeup of the United States than, say, Congress, or definitely the Supreme Court, or the cabinet. I'm sorry, the cabinet is a bureaucracy, but this is the entire bureaucracy, including, of course, the military and all of your state and local. So this kind of shows you the light blue is the percentage, say the percentage of whites in America and the percentage of whites in bureaucracy. So just kind of compares, and you can see there's 50.8% female and 42% makes up the bureaucracy. So kind of gives you an idea there. And then as far as each president, so we have 15 cabinets. So there's probably 4,000 different heads of bureaucracies and judges that the president has to fill those positions. But we're going to talk about the 15 cabinets. And if you look at diversity amongst the cabinet leaders, you can see that all presidents before 1932 never picked a woman, never picked any minorities to run any of the 15 branches. From Franklin D. Roosevelt on, he had one woman, Eisenhower had one woman, Johnson had one minority, Ford had one woman and one minority, Carter just started going up a little bit, all the way up to Clinton and Bush and Obama. And I believe your book, let me see if I can get to your book, shows Trump's. So yeah, so 5 days. So Trump has 3 women and 3 minorities. Actually, one of the women is the head of transportation, Elaine Chao. She is the wife of Mitch McConnell, who is the Republican Senate Majority Leader, and she's also Asian. So really, instead of 6 women and minorities, it's really 5 because she counts as 2. And I believe one woman, the head of the Homeland Security, was let go. So there might only be two women right now. I think it's Betsy DeVos, who's the head of education. And so we're really talking two and two. Anyway, going backwards as far as having a diverse cabinet. Okay, so how bureaucracies grow. So your book goes into the history. Please read that so you understand the history of bureaucracies. Originally, uh, positions in bureaucracies were given away as a gift for supporting someone to become president. So if you donated to a president candidate's campaign and that person won, then he gave you a position. That was called the spoils system, and it was a system in which government jobs were given out as political favors. Or if the president wanted something, here, I'll give you a ambassadorship and you can do this for me. Some of the appointed positions, many of the appointed positions are still kind of done that way, but not the jobs themselves. So now we have more universalistic politics. This is government run according to very transparent rules and impartially applied, which means that everybody gets the same chance to get a certain position. And this was shifted when we passed the Pendleton Civil Service Act, when they decided to go to a merit based public service. So, like you saw in that video, if you want to have a federal position, you have to apply. You have to have the right credentials, the right education, the right certification. You have to take a test and pass a test. You have to have several interviews. You have to have a background check. So, working for the government is not an easy, even something like the post office, or is not an easy position to get into, but it certainly is a good one if you want some benefits or if you have a special expertise in something and you want to be in public service. It's a great job. Okay, so the next couple of slides pertain to your assignment. So please, if I were you, I would get out my book and find where it starts talking about national needs and dividing these next couple issues. Because in your assignment, you're going to, there's going to be three different categories you're going to talk from. The first category is, and the first question you're going to answer is, what national needs push the United States or push the bureaucracy you are writing about into being? So it could be war, maybe if you picked expanding the military. War could be one of the national needs. It could be morality. It could be the economics. Maybe something in the economy happens that pushed your like, let's say for morality. An example would be if when food started going bad and people were sick, we would need to make sure we have inspectors to inspect our meat because we don't want people to die. So, but your book gives you different explanations, geography and race. So immigration is a race issue. So if you pick something along, if you pick a bureaucracy with the border control or ICE or any of those agencies, you might be able to write about this. So you want to make sure that you talk about one of these five issues or something else that you think pushed your particular bureaucracy that you chose or your particular agency that you chose into being. So why did Congress say, oh, I think we need a department to I think we need a commission, a federal elections commission, to make sure that the elections are fair. Or I think we need a space program because, and we know why the space program was pushed into being, because we were in a race with the Russians to get information about travel in space. Okay, so then the second question will be, what part of a bureaucratic model, this is the bureaucratic model right here, do you recognize in your bureaucracy that you chose? Now, Realistically, all five of these are probably going to be involved in all of your bureaucracies because it's a bureaucratic model. And you can find this in almost any company. If you think of the company that you work for, you have hierarchy, you have division of labor. If you work at a hotel and you were hired as a chef, you're probably not going to park the cars and you're not going to grab the valet to go cook a meal. You have a division of labor, so you have experts doing certain things, you have fixed schedules. The rules should apply to everyone, just like in a company, you can't allow one person to do something and not get in trouble. The rules should apply to everyone. And then there's also technical qualifications. So, as far as hierarchy, this is what hierarchy looks like. This is just an example in your book of the Department of Energy. So you have the secretary, who's the Department of Energy secretary, and then they have their equal people, boards helping them, and then underneath them there are bigger branches, and underneath that there are smaller, I'm sorry, not bigger, there are sections, and then under that there are smaller sections, and they all break off. So that just shows that if you're working in a job, you have a boss, your boss has a boss, and up until you get to the owner. So in the case of the government, everyone's boss would be the president. And then division of labor, like I said, so hierarchy is that you know that there are people, there's a chain of command. Division of labor, that there are specialists doing certain tasks, fixed routines. All, if you've ever worked for a company, your standard operating procedures, you probably got a book that told you what to do if someone falls in your place of business, what to do if you need a day off, what forms to fill out. So standard operating procedures are just basically saying that we have procedures set in place and everybody follows them. And then, like I said, the bureaucratic official is not supposed to care whose daughter you are or what special story you have to tell. So the rules have to apply to all. And most bureaucracies hire experts in the field. So you should have experience and education backing what you're applying for. And then the third thing you're going to talk about in your assignment is what kind of bureaucratic pathologies are there? And pathologies are problems or they're problems. And so there's a lot in bureaucracies, and many of you could name them. Your book gives you these technical terms, but you can use them in your own words and explain to me. You're not going to find this online. You can't, like, you're going to have to use your knowledge, read up about your bureaucracy. And there should be, you can look at any problems in the news you can find. So rote means that, for example, the VA has been accused of having old standardized routines. Maybe they haven't computerized yet. So if you know a vet who applied for some kind of benefits and it took them a really long time to get any of their benefits because they had all the paperwork was done in paper, which is kind of unheard of these days. Nothing was computerized. That would be a problem of rote, like old standardized routines that aren't updated. Mostly being computerized is a good example, going by paper. I know in Japan, everything is still done by paper. They have a hard time bringing their government bureaucracies into the computerized world, which is kind of surprising, but imperialism, status seeking can lead bureaucratic departments to grow too big. So, for example, the biggest department we have is the Department of Defense. And so, any department, they're going to get a certain amount of money every 2 years when Congress decides on the budget. And so Congress is going to look at the previous budget and say, well, the Department of Defense needed this amount of money, and they used it all. And then the Department of Defense is going to petition the government and say, we need more. And so you're always going to want to grow big so that you can stay in business, so to speak. And, there's a policy of use it or lose it. Oftentimes, if you save money for the government, then the next year they might say, well, you don't need that much, so we'll give you less. And then that means what? That some people are going to lose their jobs, or some program is going to have to get cut, or something like that. Then turf wars are competing bureaucracies that do kind of the same thing. We'll look at an example um, for health and just see how many different bureaucracies are involved in similar areas. So you often have turf wars. And then lack of coordination. You have the FBI and the CIA and the DEA, and oftentimes there's overlapping jobs, but if they shared information, they might be able to. There's a kind of humorous, kind of sad story if you read the chapter about the little Boy Scout who was accused of being a terrorist. And, had there been more coordination amongst the intelligence agencies, that kind of thing might not have happened. And then clientelism, we see this with the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, might I say, that's the name. It's supposed to protect the environment. Can also favor the people that are in it right now are really changing the rules back to favor the oil industries, fossil fuel industries, and the automobile industries. So there's a lot of clientelism going on with rolling back all of our restrictions, the really strict restrictions that Obama put into place. So this would be a form of clientelism. All right. So we'll go back to those previous slides and discuss it at the end of this lecture, just so you're clear on what your assignment's supposed to be. But moving forward, what do bureaucracies do? So the video talked about bureaucracies make rules. They also adjudicate. They can have trials if they find someone is breaking a rule, so they can be like a court. And I think they gave you one other thing, but I'm just going to break it down. I want you to remember for your exam that bureaucracies do two main things. They make rules and they implement the laws. So, for example, Congress passes a law, hands it to the president, that law. The president hands it to whatever bureaucracy is in charge of it. And that bureaucracy decides all the details of how to implement, which means to put into place, that service or that program that we get to benefit from. So if it's, building new roads or a healthcare system, the bureaucracies go through all the details. So try not to get confused between the law that Congress passes and then the rules that the bureaucracies make. Now, so in order to implement this policy. So, it talked a little bit about some of the things that they do. They draft a rule. Well, we'll talk about that. Oh, I guess we're going to talk about next in the next slide. So typically the bureaucracies will draft rules and then they'll publish it in the Federal Register for public comments. So in the video, they gave you the example of net neutrality. Had you known about it, you could have gone online and commented and said, no, we don't want to take net neutrality away. That protects us so that we can use our internet without being charged more. And then that agency has to look at the comments that the public gave. So in the video, they talked about this kind of rulemaking actually gives us a little bit more direct democracy. We get to comment on it. They have to look at it and make adjustments. But in the case of net neutrality, they looked at all the complaints, but they still ruled the appointed FCC commission. They still voted 3-2 to repeal net neutrality. Then they had to publish the final rule again. And then after they make the rules, then they implement it. And the implementation is done by what we call street bureaucrats. And these are public officials who deal directly with the public. So you need to know that if you had a question of what do bureaucracies do, they make rules and they implement the laws. That's one thing. Also, you need to know what street bureaucrats are. So a street bureaucrat might be a social worker or someone who works at the Social Security Administration or a TSA worker. That's a federal government employee that helps you through going through security at the airport, that kind of thing. People who are actually delivering the services, or a meat inspector. That could be a street level bureaucrat. So, as I said, this kind of gives you, you can read about this more, but this is the process of making a rule. So they make the rule, the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget. We talked about that last lecture. They approve the rule. It goes into the Federal Registry. People comment on it. Then they have to look at it and make final rules. It has to go to the OMB again. And the OMB is also a bureaucracy, by the way, in the executive branch. And then they have 30 days to put it the final rules in the registry. Okay, so how the bureaucracy is organized. We talked about this earlier. The cabinet departments. There's challenging to governing this because, like I said, think about if you're in a job and every 4 years your boss changes, and it might be a boss that comes in that has no idea how your business is run or anything to do with your business, and is just an appointed person that's probably making more money than you, coming in and doesn't know what the heck they're doing. So that's a challenge um, with the rotating bureaucracy. Also, the cabinet is not very diverse, so you end up having a lot of ideas that might just fit the rich and the non-affected. And then you have a variety of other agencies that we talked about. So as far as picking your bureaucracy that you're going to write about, just remember you have these 15 agencies to choose from. However, if it were me, I wouldn't pick a large one because they're just so big, and why don't you might as well pick something you're interested in. So we do have the Department of State, which is in charge of all of the embassies around the world. Department of Treasury, Department of Defense. There's all the military branches in there. Lots of times my students will pick a certain branch and a certain part of that military. You have the Department of Justice, another big Department of the Interior, agriculture. You could pick SNAP. That's a government program run by the Department of Agriculture. Um, Department of Commerce, Labor, Transportation, Housing and Urban Development, Health and Human Services, Energy. We had an example of that. But all of these have sub-agencies, so you can look at their sub-agencies if there's something you want. Also, you have all these independent agencies. You have, let's stay away from NASA because I've had too many students write about NASA. You have Peace Corps, you have all of these agencies, the Federal Trade Commission if you're interested in business, elections, if you're interested in the net neutrality, you have the FCC, you have the CIA, and then, yes. And then if we look at just health, so this is the big H is health. These are all the different bureaucratic agencies that have something to do with health. So no need to just say the Department of Health. You could do the Food and Drug Administration. Yeah, any of those. So there's that. And then this slide just shows you when each bureaucracy was brought into being. So this might give you an idea of the special when the national needs happened. So of course, some of them, were established from the beginning. I think our first couple departments were State, Treasury, Defense, and I think the Defense was called the Department of War originally, and then the Justice Department. Those were the first four when the nation started. The most recent one is Homeland Security, and that has a boatload of different agencies within it. You have ICE, you have Border Patrol, you have the Immigration what's it called? ISIS, ISCIS. Yeah, all kinds. You have, plant controls, plant and animal controls in there. So go ahead and look up that. You might want to pick one of those. And then we also have Social Security Administration, Veterans Affairs, the Post Office. But pick something you're interested in, and it's supposed to be an enjoyable assignment. So, and then if you pick any, a lot of people are interested in education. Go to the Department of Education and find its hierarchical and see if there's like a committee or a section of that you want to talk about. There's also national parks, there's forestry, there's fish and wildlife. There's thousands to choose from. So take some time to look at it. And these are all the different types that we've already discussed. And then you have all of your commissions. And they kind of give you a timeline of when they started and what happened. So you might get an idea of what national needs pushed it into being. All right. So we're going to watch this just so everybody still understands the types of agencies, and then we'll talk about your assignment.
Hi, I'm Craig, and this is Crash Course Government and Politics, and today we're going to do something we try to do a lot at Crash Course: punch eagles. Also, help you understand the news better. Now, we're not going to explain it like Ezra Klein, well, we sort of will, or break it down into graphs and charts like Nate Silver, or slow jam it like Jimmy Fallon. We're not going to slow jam it, Stan! Instead, Bureaucrat Jimmy and I are going to give you some tools you need to better understand news stories and opinions about government and politics by describing the various types of bureaucracies that affect our lives. Ain't that right, BJ? Yeah. There are a number of ways we can try to make sense of the vast federal bureaucracy, and one of the most straightforward is to categorize the different agencies by type. Now, labeling them this way doesn't actually tell us what they do, but you'll see them labeled this way in books and articles, so you should be familiar with the terms that political writers use. The first type of bureaucracy is the cabinet-level agency, also called the executive department. Each of the 15 departments is usually headed by a secretary, except the Justice Department, which is run by the Attorney General. You can find a list of the executive departments in any good textbook, and I bet there might be a list on the internet somewhere, too. Maybe. But the ones you hear the most about are the State Department, the Department of Defense, and the Treasury Department. Others, like the Department of the Interior, or Housing and Urban Development, you usually only hear about when there's a new secretary or a scandal. Executive departments mostly provide services through sub-agencies. For example, the FBI is technically part of the Department of Justice, and the FDA is part of the Department of Health and Human Services. There are also independent agencies that are very similar to executive departments because their heads require Senate confirmation. Well, their whole body requires. I'm talking about the head, like they're the boss, the head of the agency. The best example here is the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, but NASA is another independent agency. Next, we have the independent regulatory commissions, which are supposed to be further removed from presidential oversight, which makes them independent. You can recognize them because they're usually called commissions, like the Federal Communications Commission, the Federal Trade Commission, and the Securities and Exchange Commission. They all have rule-making authority and the power to punish violations of the rules, often through fines. If you pay attention to stories about banking, especially banking malfeasance, you'll find plenty of stories about SEC fines. Last, and pretty much least, frankly, are the government corporations that are supposed to make profits, but in fact tend to rely on government subsidies to stay afloat. The U.S. Postal Service and Amtrak are the best known, and for most Americans, these are the agencies with which we have the most contact, especially the post office. A more useful way to think about bureaucracies is in terms of what they actually do, their functions, although the problem here is that many bureaucracies have more than one function. Maybe the thought bubble can help us out. Thought bubble! Let's do this! Some bureaucracies primarily serve clients. Many of the sub-agencies of the cabinet departments fit this bill, with the most obvious being the Food and Drug Administration, which serves the public by testing and approving new drugs, the Centers for Disease Control, which tries to do exactly what the name suggests, and the National Institutes of Health, which, among other things, sponsors research that improves citizens' health. All of these agencies are under the auspices of the Department of Health and Human Services. Another good example of a client-serving agency is the Department of Agriculture, which, in addition to rating meat, administers the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is the snappy new name for food stamps. A second function that many agencies perform is to maintain the union. One way agencies maintain the union is by collecting revenue, because without money, the country doesn't function. The main agency in charge of collecting revenue is the IRS. A second form of maintaining the union is providing security for its citizens. The Department of Justice, which prosecutes federal crimes and protects civil rights, and the Department of Homeland Security, which among other things is in charge of airport security, are the main agencies that ensure internal security. Bureaucracies also keep Americans safe from external threats. This is the job of various intelligence services like the CIA and NSA, and especially the Department of Defense. A third function of bureaucracies is to regulate economic activity, primarily by creating and enforcing rules and regulations. Some of the agencies primarily charged with enforcing regulations are housed within executive departments, like OSHA within the Department of Labor. Others, like the FCC and SEC, are independent. The fourth major function of bureaucracies is closely related to regulating economic activity. Some bureaucracies have the primary function of redistributing economic resources. Agencies concerned with fiscal and monetary policy handle the inflow and outflow of money money in the economy through taxes, spending, and interest rates. Providing direct aid to the poor or welfare is another function of bureaucracies that is even more complex and controversial. Most of these agencies, like the Social Security Administration, provide direct services, so we can see the overlap between the function of agencies. Thanks, Thought Bubble. I've been suggesting that even though they aren't mentioned in the Constitution, bureaucracies are pretty powerful, so I should probably explain where that power comes from. Basically, Thor's hammer. Actually, no, it doesn't come from that at all. It comes from Congress, which, as we've seen, delegates power to executive agencies in varying degrees. But once the agencies exist, they create power for themselves by maximizing their budgets. Bureaucracies lobby for their own interests, and the bigger and more important they are, the more money they get from Congress. We tend to think that the national defense is important, so the Department of Defense is able to convince Congress to give it lots of money. Although more money can lead to more problems, as Biggie helpfully reminded us. Money is also probably the most important lever of power in the U.S. In addition to getting money for themselves, another source of bureaucratic power is the expertise of bureaucrats themselves. The president, and especially Congress, will often rely on bureaucratic experts to tell them how a policy will be implemented. The source of their power is the experts' command of useful information. You shouldn't underestimate this, as any number of technology companies will tell you. So those are two ways of thinking about bureaucracies. I hope that they're helpful, and at least when you hear about the FCC issuing a fine for Janet Jackson's wardrobe malfunction or something, you'll understand who's doing the punishing. And when you read about Congress cutting SNAP funding, you'll be like, "Oh, SNAP! That's tied up with a farm bill." Thanks for watching. I'll see you next episode. Crash.
Okay. Gotta love that guy. He goes through things fast, so you're always welcome to just click on the link on the PowerPoint and watch the video again just to catch everything. But hopefully by now you'll have that gave you a bunch of other bureaucracies you can choose from to write your report. Okay, so before we go on to the assignment, I just want to talk about who controls bureaucracies. So in a way we do because the laws that are made by Congress, they're responsive to us. And if we are voting in and out our people and they're listening to us, then we somewhat have a say in how things go. In theory, though, the president controls the bureaucracy. The Constitution puts the executive power in the president. And your book talks about an overhead democracy, which is a system by which people elect the president, who through his or her appointees control the bureaucracy from the top. The president is elected by the people and then appoints bureaucrats. So that means if we don't like who the president's appointing to all the bureaucracies, then you have to vote and get enough people to vote that president out. Okay. But Congress actually shapes the bureaucracies, like the video just said, through 4 powers. 1, through their budget. They can give them money, the same amount of money, less money, or they could cut the whole program. So through funding, that's a big power that Congress has. Oversight. And oversight is Congress has the formal powers to supervise the executive branch, which also includes impeachment process. But including the White House and federal bureaucratic operations. So Congress could go in and say, hey, EPA, those are not the rules that we set into place, and that's not the way we want it done. And if it's, they could do a couple things. They could go to the court system and bring an issue to court, or they could look at their law and if it doesn't cover. If somehow the bureaucracy made a new rule that they got around the law, Congress has the option to make a new law or amend a current law or make a law altogether. Yeah, make a new law or amend a current law. So that's their oversight ability. They can evaluate an agency about how well they're doing. All right. They also have authorization because, like I said, they can amend programs, they can reauthorize or not, and they can reorganize the whole structure. They could make a law that says no more are we going to have 25 departments that regulate healthcare. We're going to make it 1 or 2 departments or something like that. So Congress has this power. Also, interest groups can engage with the bureaucrats, and they have a lot of lobbying power where they can comment on the rules. So, for example, when net neutrality was on the Federal Registry, and it was open for public comment. It wasn't just open for public comment for us consumers who wanted to complain about it. It was also open for public comment from the big corporations, especially the internet service providers who really wanted it repealed, and they have a lot of money. They can comment. They can go to the bureaucrats and say this isn't going to work. This is why. And we'll help you write the new law or something like that. So interest groups also have a lot of power over how the bureaucracies are run. But in the end, the bureaucracies themselves have a lot of autonomy. They're doing the day-to-day works, and since they can make the rules, you know, they do have a lot of power to set up things and run their departments, as long as they don't come up against any problems, any corruption, anything like that. Which, speaking of corruption, that brings us to our next topic. So, bureaucrats wind up with this considerable autonomy in how they do their work, and so they're actually applying their best judgment to the problems they face. Without anyone, because there's so many, they can get away with maybe spending money recklessly or some kind of corruption or fraud. So in that case, a federal worker who reports corruption or fraud is called a whistleblower. And we know what a whistleblower is now because more than ever in the last couple months, we know that there was a whistleblower within one of um, the intelligence agencies that knew about the quid pro quo, which means you do me a favor and then we'll do you something, a favor, on the telephone call that the transcripts were released a while ago. So that whistleblower, there is some laws in place that protects whistleblowers from their identity. Unfortunately for that person, they're not as strong. Like there's no laws to protect. They're not as strong for some of the agencies that are close to national security, like the intelligence agencies or the military or national security agency. So we'll see what happens because, and maybe by the time you listen to this, we'll already know what happened. But at current, the president is asking for the identity to be revealed, which is the opposite of what the law to protect whistleblowers is meant for, unless, of course, their claim is found to be a lie or false, which this one hasn't. It's been corroborated over and over again by other government officials that are saying the same thing. So, anyway, that's what a whistleblower is. It's in bold. You need to know that. And then street level bureaucrats, I believe that's the second time I've had in there. Please note that term. So reforming the bureaucracy, some of the biggest problems is the cost. So in order to reform it would be to cut the budgets, cut the red tape. So in your assignment, you're supposed to tell me, I believe, how you would make it better, maybe making it more efficient or bringing it online. Then you would need less people online, meaning computerized if it happens to be something like the VA. But you can't make this stuff up. You have to have, it has to be true. So you can't just make it up, please. Inertia is we've just kind of gotten this momentum of growing and growing all the bureaucracies, especially that one slide showing how many of the bureaucracies have to do with healthcare. Maybe there's some trimming we could do there. Public mistrust, scandals, mistakes, errors or corruptions. Your book talks about a couple different scandals and people caught in this current administration. In all administrations, somebody is found out. This one, however, has had a lot more than normal. So if you pick, I think the EPA had someone that was fired because of misuse of funds. A variety of appointed officials in the bureaucracies have been fired or kicked out because of scandals or mistakes or misusing funds. And then, just to get the overall picture of our spending, your book has a chart, but it shows the percentage of GDP, and I think that sometimes students have a hard time understanding that as much as just how much money. So, um, this chart is in the trillions. So it just shows the federal spending in the trillions year by year. So each president says they're going to lower the federal budget. I think, let's see, this was around the crisis. Obama came into office in 2008. We had some bailout bills kind of lowering, and then a steady or slow climb up. And since Trump's been in office, it's continuing to go up. So part of this is, well, this is the federal spending. So we'll talk about in our when we talk about policy about income and spending a little bit later. All right, so reforming, we can open up the system more. The Freedom of Information Act allows us access if we know more about what the bureaucracies are doing and care enough to find out more. Another option is reinventing government, just starting all over and getting rid of some of the bureaucracies, or privatizing. Maybe private firms can do a better job for less. But we know that privatizing, private companies want to make a profit, and it's our money that we're spending. So this might work in some areas and maybe not in others, but these are some of the options for reforming bureaucracy. And you can come up with some yourself. Okay, so your assignment, this is on Canvas. You can go ahead and look at it. First and foremost, I want to bring your attention. Originally, I said December 8th. December 11th will be your deadline. I extended this deadline to give you a little more time. Assuming you're just looking at this now, and sometimes some of you have left things go to the last minute, which is understandable, but nonetheless. So you're to write a 2 to 3 page essay. Doesn't have to be long. It can be just under 2 pages. Doesn't, just long as you have addressed all these things. On a government service that is important to you. So pick something you like that stems from the bureaucracy. The federal bureaucracy, by the way, not state bureaucracy. In other words, pick a bureaucracy to write about. Please double space. It doesn't need to be a long report. I just want you to touch on these items. So please include the following. Describe a U.S. government service or the bureaucracy, whichever one you picked. It could be something, this was just giving you an idea, but by now you know what a bureaucracy is. That you are interested in, and explain why you're interested in it. So this one's the easiest part, worth 2 of the 10 points. Describing what the bureaucracy is and what it does and why you're interested in it. So one of the points is just your opinion, why you're interested in it. Then explain what kind of bureaucracy it is. Is it a cabinet? Is it a sub-agency? Is it a commission? You'll know it's a commission if it has the word commission in it. Is it an intelligence agency? What kind of bureaucracy is it? Does it stem from? Who is in charge? So who's the boss? If it's the CIA, you want to look up who's the director of the CIA. If it's, the Marines, you'll find out who is the head of the Marines. So there's always someone in charge. And then what type of legislation is being implemented. So this is the hardest one. You have to use your brain on this. Now, here's the thing. All of the bureaucracies have a government website. So it's going to be something.gov. And they're pretty much all of them are going to have an explanation. And you probably will see it somewhere within the first couple pages of the website, how if you picked SNAP, what law put SNAP into being. So you should be able to pick up what type of legislation implemented this bureaucracy. And then you're going to answer the 3 questions we just went over in this slideshow. What type of national needs do you think pushed the agency into being? So this is basically what made Congress decide that we needed Social Security. That happened during the New Deal, which was a bunch of different laws that were passed after the Great Depression because we had so many people had lost all their money and all their homes. And a majority of them were senior citizens that had lost all their savings in their homes. And so Congress didn't want to have a bunch of poor people with no money and no homes on the streets. So they figured out an entitlement program that everyone could pay into, like an insurance policy. And then seniors could take a small subsistence that could help them uh, uh, pay for their needs to get by. Something like that. And then write about what parts of bureaucratic model do you recognize or have you heard about that relate to this issue. So you can do a little bit of Googling on your bureaucracy, and I mean, you like I said, all 5 of the parts of the bureaucratic model are in it. So just pick one. You don't have to write on all 5. Just pick 1 or 2 national needs, 1 or 2 bureaucratic model examples, and 1 or 2 bureaucratic pathologies. So these are the problems that you see in the agency. So this is where 3 points should be, maybe a paragraph each or a couple sentences each. And then finally, what do you appreciate about this service and activity? So maybe you have maybe you're going to pick Pell Grants and, or something that you receive or somebody in your family receives. WIC is another one for women and infants, the program that people get services that way. Maybe you know someone. So you would appreciate it because you've seen it in your life or whatever. So why you appreciate the service, or if you care about our national forests or our parklands. And what would you do to make it better? So 2 points there. And please turn it in online. All right. So as far as this, I have extended the deadline. I would appreciate it if you let me know which what you're doing it on, and give me your first choice, second choice, and third choice by sending me an email. I'll let the people who come first serve gets to pick. I just don't want everyone doing the same thing. Okay, so try to get that in as quickly as you can, and hopefully we won't get everyone writing on the same bureaucracy. There's thousands of them, so hopefully we'll get some variety there. All right, and finally, your exam notes. Let's see. You'll need to know what is a bureaucracy, who is in charge, the types of bureaucracies. Know the largest. Oh, I don't know if I pointed that out. Let me see if I pointed that out. Which bureaucracy is the largest? Here we are. Yes. So if we see the Department of Defense has 800,000 civilians and 1.4 million uniformed military. That is our largest department. That means we have the most amount of employees. So that's the answer to that. I don't think I mentioned that when we were on it, but and what do bureaucracies do? They make rules and they implement the laws of Congress. What is a street bureaucrat? Someone that administers the service to the people. What's a whistleblower? That's someone who reports frauds or corruptions and is protected by the laws that we have in place. And the powers of Congress to oversee the executive branch and the bureaucracies. So just be familiar with those, and good luck on your assignments. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. And there will be no discussion question on this topic. And you'll have one more discussion question on the judicial branch, and that will be all your discussion questions. We're getting near the end. So good luck and keep up with your readings. Thank you.